Hello everyone, thanks for coming back to hear what else I saw in August that I haven't already told you about. Before we begin, I'd like to express my gratitude to everybody for your warm wishes and congratulations on the 10th anniversary video, and welcome to all the new viewers. I appreciate your kind words and I hope you enjoy it here. On with the movies. Number one is definitely the newest film I have to talk about, and it's not even that new anymore, 2022's The Lost City. Sandra Bullock plays a reclusive writer of popular, sexy adventure novels. She's sick of them, but she has to keep writing them, and she's required to do a press tour with her cover model, played by Channing Tatum, doing his best impression of a himbo. Pretty sure that's the first time I've used that term on the channel. When Bullock is kidnapped by a rich guy hunting for treasure who needs her to translate an ancient text, Tatum attempts to rescue her. When I first saw the ads for this, I thought it looked unoriginal but fun. And then I heard it was stupid, and that put me off for a while. But last month I decided to give it a try anyway. And it is pretty stupid. Many scenes that are clearly supposed to be funny didn't score a laugh, and then they go on way too long. I think I only laughed out loud twice. Bullock and Tatum both have decent comedic chops. She is very typical of herself, her rom-com style self, and while Channing Tatum doesn't do much for me, his performance is endearingly dopey, and their dynamic is mildly entertaining. But do they work as a romantic pair? I'm not sure. The chemistry could have been worse, but I was never sold on them as a couple. I don't know how much older she is in years, it doesn't really matter, so I didn't bother to look it up. What matters is how much older she seems in terms of intellect and maturity. Now, he turns out to be a very sweet, thoughtful, loyal guy, and there is a lot to be said for those qualities. But he feels almost like a kid, especially compared to her. I also can't decide if the supporting characters were cartoonish or if they stole the spotlight. Daniel Radcliffe plays the deranged baddie with a sarcastic streak, and I got the feeling he understood his assignment and was enjoying himself. Davine Joy Randolph was also pretty good. I appreciated her character's development later on, and Brad Pitt's brief role was amusing. But while the cast did their part, the film never fully rose to the occasion. It had a lame start, and though it held my attention for most of its runtime, minus a few dull, obligatory scenes, it never rose above a half-hearted, just okay. Movie number two is 1958's The Lineup, a gritty San Francisco-set crime thriller about a drug trafficking ring. The first chunk is a somewhat dry police procedural that presents kind of a confusing dynamic between the two cops. The one who seems younger and a little dense, played by Emil Meyer, is actually the smoother detective. But things get much more interesting when the perspective shifts. Since Eli Wallach is the star and heavily featured in the promotional material, I kinda thought that he would be playing a good guy this time, perhaps a lead detective. But no, he's playing a psychopath. I might bemoan that fact were he not so good at being a crazy bad guy. He's intense, chilling, and vicious. He makes the movie. He's joined by Robert Keith as his cold-blooded mentor, and Richard Jekyll as their assigned driver, a dimwit trying too hard to be cool. There were a couple points where the dialogue was bland and oddly repetitive, and a couple other times when I felt like someone didn't take the time to connect the dots and show how police got from point A to point B, but the bulk of the film stays with the bad guys, and all of that is really good. The situation escalates as we go with them from one place to another, and people start sweating as the bodies begin to pile up. It's a well-made, satisfying, eerie crime thriller. Movie number three is another crime flick, 1951's The Mob. Broderick Crawford plays a policeman who gets mixed up in a mob hit. Taking advantage of the situation, the force sends him to infiltrate the mob and identify the man responsible for the killing. I didn't like this one as much. From the get-go, I struggled with it. It starts with action, and then there's a prolonged scene of exposition, just people talking and giving background, and during that info dump, I found it hard to keep track of who was who, in charge of what, and what the plan was. I was able to follow the plot well enough, but it's like the movie and I got off on the wrong foot. Also, seeing Crawford take on this tough guy attitude, picking fights with everybody, was kind of unappealing. The last thing I saw him in was 1950's Convicted opposite Glenn Ford, and I really liked him there. He was personable, he had a little sense of humor, and it was just a great role. Here, the acting was fine, but I never warmed to his protagonist. I never felt like I really knew anything about him. The supporting cast includes Richard Kiley, Ernest Borgnine in a small, heavy role before he became a star, and in a tiny part, Charles Bronson. Movie number 4 is a viewer recommendation, 1970's Soul Survivor. In this blend of war drama and fantasy, the crew of a World War II bomber that crashed in the desert has been waiting 17 years for their wreck to be discovered. You might be thinking, 17 years? That doesn't make any sense. Well, that's where the fantasy element comes in. I wasn't sure if my parents, specifically my dad, who likes stories and war movies grounded in reality, would go for this one, but I really liked it. It's an old TV movie, so it's a little more simple and stylistically of its time, but I thought it worked well as an alternative kind of war story. Yes, the premise is a bit odd, but here are the magic words. It's like a lengthy Twilight Zone episode. It's about a group of people trapped in a strange place with a touch of the supernatural, fantastical, otherworldly, and a Rod Serling-esque demand for justice. Vince Edwards, William Shatner, and Richard Basehart star, and they each play their complicated characters well, but I particularly enjoyed the members of the bomber crew. They were all well cast, I liked their interactions with each other, and I liked how they were photographed. They were the heart of the film, and I'm glad they were featured as much as they were. And regarding the upload you can find on YouTube, considering it's a 1970 TV movie, the quality is excellent. Movie number 5 is another viewer recommendation, 1959's Tiger Bay. Hayley Mills, in her film acting debut, plays a scampish little girl who witnesses Horst Buchholz's Polish sailor kill his girlfriend in an argument. Mills gets a hold of the gun, and she wants to keep it because all the other kids have toy guns, so she conceals what she saw from the police. But Buchholz knows that she can identify him. This is a very good thriller, with Hayley Mills's esteemed father John Mills playing a stubborn Scotland Yard superintendent. It's one of those films where you find yourself rooting against the law as a connection begins to form between the two leads. Their performances are very strong. The dynamic between them is a bit up to interpretation. It's not always clear-cut what exactly they feel toward each other. I will say, though, that I think it's obviously a crush on her side, and it's understandable. Buchholz's boyishly handsome sailor is a troubled soul, but also one of the only people who shows her kindness. If this came out nowadays, some people would probably read something unseemly into the relationship. They would probably also decry Hayley Mills as a nepo baby, but she more than holds her own with her wide, expressive eyes and her animated little face, not letting her own father, in an unusually stern performance, steal any of the scenes they share. And her rapport with Buchholz, in his first English-language film after starring in half a dozen or so German films, makes the story as stirring as it is riveting, and I really enjoyed it. I also admired the way the inciting altercation was shown, smoothly and seamlessly switching from Polish to English and back again as the perspective changed. Nicely done. Movie number 6 is 1968's Krakatoa East of Java. I was prompted to finally watch this after reviewing Irwin Allen's When Time Ran Out a few months ago. In this epic adventure, passengers and crew of a salvage ship go diving in search of treasure near a dangerous volcano that's about to erupt. The most popular piece of trivia for Krakatoa East of Java is that Krakatoa is in fact west of Java, so right off, the title makes a silly mistake. Either it was a mistake, or someone just thought that Krakatoa East of Java sounded better than Krakatoa West of Java, which is just ridiculous. I had hoped that that would be an isolated incident, but no, it's tedious, dialogue is clumsy, conversations don't gel, casting is mediocre, there were 2 random song sequences in the first 20 minutes, which misled me into thinking this was a musical, it's got some fancy camera work that's really just ugly, and there's too much boring filler. To be fair, it does pick up once the volcano starts belching fire. It packs some interesting stuff into the last act, but it takes eons to get there, and the special effects aren't great enough to make it all seem worth it. I did notice that Eugène Laurier did some work on this. He was production designer and did some special effects direction. A few years earlier, 1961, he directed Gorgo, which I reviewed last month, and there are some interesting, significant similarities between these 2 movies. Is this better than When Time Ran Out? I don't know. I think they're about equal. They're both bloated movies with only a few characters you care about, and roughly 20 minutes of moderately engaging material. Movie number 7 is 1990's Dreams, or as my mom and I have always called it, Kurosawa's Dreams. In this American-produced Japanese-language film, 80-year-old writer-director Akira Kurosawa depicts a series of his lifelong recurring dreams, the settings ranging from idyllic forests to fanciful landscapes to post-apocalyptic wastelands. Way back in the day, before reality TV took over, Bravo used to play... Is Bravo even still a channel? I should look that up. Bravo used to play short films in between artsy-fartsy stuff, and my mom and a very young little Weaselberry caught segments of this. They also played these surreal cartoons that had this boxy little guy who would be struggling with some basic task, and I remember one where he ended up getting sucked into a vacuum cleaner. It was weird, it really made an impression on me. I feel like I think about that way more often than I should, but I've never been able to identify it. I have no idea what this cartoon was, so if anybody has a clue what I'm talking about, please let me know in the comments. Anyway, sometimes they ran segments from Dreams, and taken on their own, out of context, they were very strange indeed, and it became a thing that we joked about for years. Hey, remember Kurosawa's Dreams? And so when we started watching Godzilla movies, and then Kurosawa movies, and Ozu movies, I think my mom expected all Japanese films to be something like this. But this is very different. As it happens, I only recognized one of the dreams, the blizzard, which I knew right away. Mom also remembered the tunnel, which she said scared her, and Mount Fuji in red. Technically, I would say half of these are more nightmare than dream, and they often end the way dreams do, abruptly, incomprehensibly, or when you, the dreamer, have reached an impasse and you either have to wake up or die. All the segments are visual marvels, the screen often saturated with many rich, vibrant colors. Images are beautifully composed, music is complementary, precision is meticulous. As is customary with Kurosawa, there's an emphasis on weather, be it rain, sun, wind, snow, fog. Here are my very quick thoughts on each of the vignettes, not in chronological order. I think Sunshine Through the Rain had the most shocking moment, considering what the kid is ordered to do. Crows had the visuals I marveled at the most, with sets and scenery looking just like Van Gogh paintings brought to life, but realizing Martin Scorsese was playing the artist was a bit jarring. The Peach Orchard had the most compelling, albeit bittersweet story. Mount Fuji in red was creepily artistic, and I saw the hand of Ishiro Honda. The tunnel was spooky, but I kept expecting something else to happen, another shoe to drop. The Weeping Demon was probably the most distressing. The blizzard struck me as the most logical, or rather the easiest to interpret, and the village of the watermills I thought was the most anticlimactic. It was nice to see Chishu-ryu, but it has so much philosophical dialogue that I have a hard time believing it came straight out of a dream. I did not come away with a strong favorite. They're beautiful and interesting vignettes, but none of them stands out as having touched me or spoken to me in a meaningful way. But there are dark, significant themes that one could spend all day analyzing, and the visuals are lovely, just like living paintings. The peach blossoms blowing in was a highlight to me. Also, Van Gogh's world as he saw it, covered with thick daubs of paint. And I'll probably still think of the blizzard first. Movie number 8 is a viewer recommendation, 1977's SST Death Flight. Passengers and crew of a new supersonic aircraft have to contend with an explosion and a virus leak on board the plane's maiden flight to Paris. Being a TV movie, this is nowhere near as grandiose as the first 3 airport films, although it does have a good deal in common with the 4th and final entry in that series, the Concorde Airport 79, which came out 2 years later and actually had the same director, David Lowell Rich. Both movies are pretty ridiculous, but at least Airport 79 had Alain Delon's Captain to keep my attention. There's no one that handsome here. It's the usual formula: corporate ambition, relationship drama, personal tensions, popular actors of the day, plus a couple veterans. I would say this cast isn't as impressive, but I missed some of the character introductions because my mom kept calling out actors' names and saying which shows they were on. She seemed to know just about everybody, but I was only familiar with half the names. I don't do much retro TV, and especially if there's 70s stars who didn't have much longevity beyond a couple of years in that decade, chances are I don't know them so well, so your mileage may vary. It's kind of an amusing group of people, including John Delancey as the necessary jerk who riles up the passengers. He's jealous of Peter Graves, who I kept expecting to pilot the plane. Burgess Meredith stands out as the wily designer, as does Brock Peters as the doctor on board. Robert Reed is dry as a bone, but nails the classic pilot intercom voice, and a young Billy Crystal plays a flight attendant. It definitely has some warts, and I don't think I could say it was more than okay, but my mom liked it, and it's entertaining enough. Movie number 9 is 1945's The Unseen, a thriller in which Gail Russell takes a job as governess to widower Joel McCrea's 2 unruly children. But a cleaning woman's just been murdered in a nearby alley, and there are strange goings-on in the house next door that's been locked up for 12 years. I had highish hopes for this one. I liked the leads, the story sounded cliché but promising, and I found out later it was intended as a follow-up to The Uninvited. Same director, same leading lady. Unfortunately, it didn't meet my expectations. There were aspects of the mystery that were obvious early on, so we were just waiting for characters to catch up. I've liked Gail Russell since I saw her in Angel and the Bad Man, and I think she did a fine job here, but Joel McCrea is kind of dull, and Herbert Marshall is underutilized. The little girl was fine, but I couldn't stand the boy, and I found it got a bit jumbled at a certain point, which was odd because there aren't that many characters or elements to keep track of. Then again, Raymond Chandler was one of the screenwriters, so no wonder it starts to get convoluted. It was a passable film if you're looking for an 80-minute mystery, but don't go into it expecting anything too special. Movie number 10 is another viewer recommendation and another flight disaster flick. I don't know what happened. I tried not to double up on these things. Is 1954's The High and the Mighty. Trouble strikes a new transocean flight from Hawaii to California, forcing crew and passengers to prepare for a deadly plunge into the ocean. I wasn't fond of this one either. It's a character-driven disaster film, so I should like that, but it's nearly 2.5 hours long, and half of that runtime passes before anything really happens. And that first hour is slow. Once disaster did finally kick in, it got better, but there were still lengthy periods checking in on various characters, relationships, conflicts, and that's the focus, how this flight changes the people involved, and I like that concept. I just didn't glom onto the people. John Wayne plays the co-pilot, giving an impressively subdued performance. He was fine. Robert Newton and Jan Sterling are also pretty good, revealing their characters' vulnerabilities without overdoing it, and Claire Trevor revels in her glamorous role, but the various other characters struggle to make a firm impression. None of the performances is really bad, but considering what this was clearly intended to be, it falls short. This was an ambitious production. Big, long, cinemascope, big names. It's like an airport movie before its time, except with more dialogue, slower pacing, and longer scenes. It actually reminds me a lot of The Crowded Sky, which I think was 1960. It also had a lot of characters, a lot of drama, a long wait before you got to the disaster, and I didn't like it much. I can't really complain that these characters weren't developed enough, but despite the screen time they got, most of them didn't feel fully realized. Movie number 11 is a rewatch, 1943's Shadow of a Doubt, one of my favorite Joseph Cotten movies and my favorite black and white Hitchcock movie. Teresa Wright plays Charlie, a girl who feels her suburban family has fallen into a rut. Her wish that something would happen to shake them all up is granted when her beloved Uncle Charlie, her namesake, comes from back east for an extended visit. Young Charlie couldn't be more pleased, until she begins to suspect her uncle is actually a serial killer on the run. I love this movie, and I could go on and on about it, but I won't, because I've already reviewed it. So if you want to hear more of my thoughts, I'll put a link to that review in the description. I'm not sure how good it is. It was a pretty old review, but I don't know, it might be interesting, so you can check that out if you want to. This was my first Joseph Cotten movie, although I might have seen Niagara first, but this is the one where I was aware that, hey, that's Joseph Cotten, and I like him. He is playing a dark, disturbed individual, but I can't deny that charming Uncle Charlie is a very attractive man, and his clothes are exceptionally tailored. Cotten and Wright's scenes together are fascinating. They have this tight bond, which is fractured by a suggestion, which leads to suspicion. Thornton Wilder's script is excellent, and the entire cast is wonderful. MacDonald Carey as the nice detective, Patricia Collins as the steady but emotional mother, Henry Travers as the father who has these hilariously macabre conversations with neighbor Hume Cronin about how they would murder each other, the noisy little brother and the bookish little sister who says some of the funniest things. I love them all. It's funny, sometimes you know right away what your favorite scene in a movie is, and other times it's a gradual realization as you watch it again and again. There's a lot to pick from here, but I think my favorite scene, at least right now, has become the one where Uncle Charlie has just heard something and he goes back into the house and trots up the stairs, and then suddenly he stops and turns, and there's young Charlie standing in the doorway, looking up at him. Like that, the dynamic shifts, the story changes, and there's no dialogue needed. Ugh, such a good movie. Movie number 12 is also a rewatch, 1999's October Sky. In this biopic, Jake Gyllenhaal plays young Homer Hickam, a teenager in a coal mining town who's so inspired by the passing of the first Russian satellite that he decides to build a rocket. This was a rewatch for all of us, my mom, my dad, and me. My mom and I have seen it a few times, and we all really like it. It's funny, it's uplifting, it's heartwarming, it feels like an authentic period piece, it's a solid underdog tale, the cast is really good. I first saw it in 6th grade science class and fell in love with Jake Gyllenhaal. Still like him to this day. Wouldn't say I still have a crush on him in this movie, since I'm no longer a 12-year-old watching him play a 17-year-old, but he gives a strong performance. Passion and enthusiasm and determination mixed with emotional sensitivity and adolescent awkwardness. Chris Cooper is also great as his distant father, who only has time for the mine, and his elder son, the football star. You really don't like him until you get to know him better. It's a character you respond to differently with repeat viewings. I also really like the three boys who play Homer's friends, especially the nerdy one who's like, "You guys aren't ashamed to hang out with me?" And also Laura Dern as the teacher who encourages the boys in their experiments no matter how many failures and setbacks they encounter. It's another great movie. Did I name this as my favorite film for 1999? I think I did. Movie number 13 is also a rewatch, but I was less familiar with this one, 2003's Runaway Jury, a New Orleans-based conspiracy thriller adapted from a John Grisham novel. John Cusack plays an electronics store clerk who's summoned for jury duty, the case a controversial civil suit between the widow of a man killed in a mass shooting and the gun manufacturer. Initially, the film seems to be an exposé of the extreme tactics that may be involved in jury selection, but then it takes a turn and reveals there's much more going on than we've been led to believe. I saw this years ago, not long after it came out, and I really didn't get it. Number one, I wasn't old enough to understand all the content. Number two, I couldn't keep up with the plot twists. This time, I struggled a bit early on, but I already knew the main twist, and I figured out that you have to be a little patient when it comes to details. Eventually, my questions were answered. It's a good movie, even though I don't agree with everything it has to say. It's a bit heavy-handed with the slow-mo button and action scenes. In a way, it's of its time in terms of editing and scoring. But it's an engaging, intricate thriller that ropes you in with a relatable premise before pulling the rug out from under you. Cusack stars opposite Rachel Weisz, and there are lots of familiar character actors in supporting roles, but in my opinion, this is Gene Hackman and Dustin Hoffman's movie. They dominate the film, they share only a single scene, but it's a big one, and arguably the best. And movie number 14 is 1982's Evil Under the Sun, an Agatha Christie adaptation that stars Peter Ustinov as famed Belgian detective Hercule Poirot. In this story, Poirot takes a trip to a resort island in the south of France where tensions between a lot of theater people erupt in murder. I don't know if I read this book or not. It would have been 20 years ago or so when I was reading about 3 or 4 Agatha Christie books per week. I was just devouring them, and some I remember perfectly, but there are a few that I don't know if I read or not. They became a blur. It doesn't really matter. This was Ustinov's second of 6 outings as Poirot. I had no idea it was that many. I thought he only did 3. And I enjoyed his performance very much. His Poirot is more charming, personable, and understanding than some others. Looks-wise, he never struck me as right for the part. He's too tall, too fair. But I find him much more likable than some other interpretations. As for the rest of the cast, it's not quite as jam-packed with stars as the films from the 70s had been, Murder on the Orient Express and Death on the Nile, but you've got a battle of the dames, Maggie Smith and Diana Rigg as old rival showgirls, exchanging barbs with sly smiles. They're a hoot. Also Roddy McDowall, James Mason, Jane Birkin. Everyone overdoes it a bit, catering to the hammy, excessive stereotypes of theater personalities. Costumes are sort of 1930s by way of the 1980s. Hairstyles are similarly over the top, adding to a feeling of campiness, and the period setting is enhanced by a jaunty score based on Cole Porter songs. It's a fun film. I wouldn't say I loved it, but it's got lots of clever dialogue and quite a few funny bits. And that's what else I saw in August. I hope you enjoyed the month's collection. As usual, you can find a list of the films I talked about and where/how I watched them in the description. Let me know your thoughts on any of these, or if you like, you can share what you saw last month in the comments below, and I'll see you next week with another review. Thanks for watching.